Hello, welcome everyone. Uh, Hope everyone's having a good day. My name is Marcia Henry, and I am the moderator for this session. Before we begin, I have a few reminders that we want to share. We have a code of conduct that we will adhere to for this conference. The link has been posted in the chat. Yes, and I can see it. I hope everybody else can see the link. If you experience any issues related to conduct, please contact us via email, genainlibraries@gmail.com. Please be sure your microphone is muted. If you have any questions, put in your questions in the question and answer tab at the bottom of the screen. That's where you enter questions. If you want to make comments, you can use chat, but the actual questions that the speakers will address will be at the end of the session. And we would appreciate hearing from you if you have questions. This session is being recorded. You can enable captions by clicking on the Show Captions button at the bottom of the screen. Okay, now I'm very happy to introduce to you the speakers for crafting effective prompts, leveraging generative AI in the library. These presenters are April Sheppard and Kristin Flachsbart. Both of them are from work at Arkansas State University Library. April is the assistant director of the library, and Kristin is the metadata specialist.
Thank you, Marcia. And I see that we got lots of people joining us. So thank you for day 3, sticking it out. We're really looking forward to this. So a quick outline of what Kristin and I are going to talk about. We're going to go through some definitions, what makes a good prompt, common concerns with AI, how prompting can make problems better or worse. And then we're going to give you some real life examples before we go on to questions. And then Kristin's going to get us started.
Hello. We're going to go through some definitions. We realize this is day 3, and some of this you might have heard before, but for those of you who haven't, we're going to go through it. So what is prompting? A prompt is simply the way that you communicate with an AI chatbot. It can be in the form of a statement, it can be a question, or it can be a command. It can be a very general prompt, or it can be very specific and scenario-based. And different styles of prompting will influence the results that you get in both accuracy and relevance. So what makes a good prompt? First, clarity. Keep it simple, keep it specific, and don't be ambiguous. If you want the AI to find you subject headings for a book, specify if you want Library of Congress headings or another type. Don't assume it's always going to know what type of headings you want. You also need to be careful about jargon, and libraries have lots of jargon. In some cases, the AI might already understand the jargon. Turns out that ChatGPT understands a lot of library acronyms such as PCC and LCSH. Still, if you aren't sure, it's best to be specific. Next, context. The AI needs to know the appropriate setting or background for the request. You can tell it to act as a certain type of profession with levels of experience. For example, I can say I'm a catalog librarian. I can say I'm an expert catalog librarian, which lots of times makes it assume that I'm a PCC cataloger, and you might not actually be part of the program for cooperative cataloging. I could also say I'm an expert cataloger at an academic library, and that will affect the results that it gives me. Next, concise. Prompts using shorter sentence structure tend to work better. A long prompt with lots of phrasing could end up confusing the AI or give you unreliable results. A prompt for a very detailed task can be a long prompt made up of shorter commands, or it can be created as a list of actions for the AI to perform. Tone. You need to tell the AI about the style of its response, especially for text-based responses. You can tell it to be more formal or more conversational. For example, when I tell it I'm an academic librarian, it tends to give me more formal academic style answers than if I just say I'm a librarian. If it's a technical piece, like a piece of software code, you can tell it to be technical. And you can even tell it to format code so it's compatible with other software. And lastly, revisions. Based on what the results the AI gives you, you're probably going to need to tweak your wording or even correct the AI as to a mistake or an assumption that it made. Common concerns. One of them, which a lot of us already know about, is hallucinations. And hallucinations are when all the training data that the AI has been given, it's taking that training data and because of its word prediction algorithm is incorrectly predicting the words to match to the query. And this can result in factual errors, invented data, and logical errors. Causes: the training data is incorrect, it's incomplete, or it's limited in scope. It also could be because an unclear or ambiguous prompt is being used. Here's an example. I asked ChatGPT to come up with Library of Congress subject headings for a book. I just gave it the title of the book and the publisher. And it gave me Library of Congress subject headings. It's basing its information off the title of the book and going through all of its training data on Library of Congress subject headings and anything referring to plants or anything including high throughput. And this is what it came up with. The highlighted results are actual correct library subject headings, Library of Congress subject headings. However, only number 2 is actually the correct subject heading for the book, and that's the one that the PCC record in connection and OCLC actually uses. The others, they sound good, but it's a hallucination. Plants phenotype, it's like, well, those are 2 key parts of the title. It should be part of the subject heading, but it's not. It's simply a hallucination. Another hallucination is for this children's book. It's a biography on John H. Johnson, who founded Ebony and Jet magazines. And I just told it the name of the book, and it came up with a summary. It based its information off of other summaries of children's books of biographies of famous people. They often grow up in poverty, turn into successful entrepreneurs. The first summary was when I just told it I was a librarian. The second one was when I told it was an academic librarian. So it stopped using this colorful language. In both cases, neither of these are correct. The book is actually about 9-year-old John H. Johnson growing up during the flood of 1927, which is one of the worst floods in Arkansas. So its summaries are completely false. Another common concern with AI is bias, and that's simply its skewed or distorted results that will show a prejudice for or against a person, a group of people, or a thing. Bias can come from a lot of different sources, and some of the most common ones are training data that's skewed or has limited samples, incomplete data, excluded data, the algorithm that it's using is weighing certain factors over others, or that your personal input is biased and you might not even realize it is.
So how can prompting impact these AI concerns that Kristin was just talking about? Well, first of all, effective prompting can lessen the amount of time she must generate results for the same prompt. A lot of tools have free credits or other cost barriers. For example, I sometimes do images in Microsoft Designer. I get 15 boosts each week. If I go through those boosts, which you can do very quickly in a week, I either have to pay or use credits or come up with other ways to be able to use the software. So if I have poor prompts, I'm not going to get good results. So it may end up where I have to just kind of settle for something that's problematic. More important, effective prompting can mitigate some of the bias and misinformation concerns. So we can lessen the examples of hallucinations, and then we can help ensure that the results are more diverse and representative of our communities. The other thing effective prompting can help us avoid is something called filter bubbles. And I love this quote, the intellectual isolation. This occurs when websites and programs use algorithms to guess what users want and only give them those results. For example, this is from my Netflix. So you can see my next watch, today's top picks, and I got a lot of horror, dark fantasy, dark comedies, crime dramas. So you're getting a really quick idea about what type of things I watch on Netflix. But this isn't actually all that I enjoy. So if I wanted a romantic comedy or just a comedy at all, Netflix is not going to suggest this for me. I have to actively go out and look for this. And we see this with social media, Google, a lot of search engines where they're personalizing to what it thinks that you want. The problem is there's a whole bunch of things that you're not getting. For example, my romantic comedies. And we know that we're seeing filter bubbles already in AI software. On top of that, we know, as Kristin mentioned earlier, our own implicit biases or our unconscious biases can impact the prompts that we use and the generated responses that we accept. And maybe it's not necessarily that we're asking for it to come up with something offensive, but maybe it's what we're unintentionally excluding when we are prompting. And the other thing is, when we accept something that's problematic, we're basically telling the AI software, good job, way to go. So if we get something and we accept the first response, we are training the AI software because AI companies are using our interactions to train their tools. Not only that, they are already personalizing our experiences. So this comes from ChatGPT. And this is something that you have to turn on, but you can customize ChatGPT. There's 2 sections of thought starters, and you enter in some things you want ChatGPT to talk about. So the first one is, where are you based? What do you do for work? What are your hobbies? What are your goals? And what we've seen with Kristin earlier is if she puts in that she's a librarian, she gets different results. So if I had ChatGPT knowing that I was also a librarian, I would probably get different results. If I put I was an administrator, I'm sure that my results would be much different than Kristin's results. And then the other one, that the first ones aren't so bad, but the bottom one is, how formal should ChatGPT, how long, how short should the responses be? But the bottom one, should ChatGPT have opinions on topics or remain neutral? So if I turned on ChatGPT to have opinions, and I am intentionally or unintentionally giving in my own opinions when I'm using it, I'm going to get this filter bubble that's going to basically start looping on itself. And I'm only going to get one really small, focused, maybe wrong area to look at. This is from Microsoft Copilot. They also have the option to turn on personalization. And it says here, quote, we will use your chat and chat history, including inferences we may make from the context of your prior chats to personalize your experience. So they're just assuming what you want. They're inferring what you want. So I think that's even worse than telling ChatGPT how I want it to react. They're going to decide for me what I want. And you can see how we're going to get caught into this loop again. So let's start looking at some different examples. So this is a prompt I put in. It's pretty generic, small child reading under a tree. And this is what it gave me. This is an Adobe Firefly. I have an Adobe Firefly or Adobe account, so I can use a Firefly as much as I want. And the first thing we notice is that these pictures aren't really that diverse. We got 4 little boys. They look pretty similar. They're all about the same age. And I will just say a quick note that Adobe Firefly has gotten a lot better about diversity in their images. This comes from 2023, but they're not perfect. And again, because I have an Adobe account, I ran the search multiple times. And eventually I ended up with another set of pictures, but still I'm lacking some level of diversity. So let's put these pictures together. So this is my prompt, small child reading under a tree. I have 8 images here. 7 out of my 8 images are white children. 5 out of the 8 are boys, 3 are girls. But let's start looking at the different layers. So that's the one that's really the most obvious. if you have not noticed, all the little boys are wearing blue and all the little girls are wearing pink. So there's some bias that's happening in the data set somewhere that's coming through. The little boys have shorts and pants, and the little girls are wearing skirts and dresses. Little boys have short hair, the little girls have long hair. Apparently only little boys wear stripes. I did not know that until I started working with generative AI, because little girls tend not to be put in striped clothing. And the one that I think kind of bothers me the most is, for some reason, all the books that the little boys are reading are thicker than the books that the little girls are reading. And just to show that this is not a 2023 problem, I did this exact same search in Microsoft Designer last week. This is powered by DALL-E 3. Same prompt, a small child reading under a tree. I added as a photo. And you can see 4 images, they're not that different. And they're 4 little white boys. Again, so this the kind of defaulting to that. And we could do the search again, and I'm going to do that revision that Kristin was talking about, just tweaking my search just a little bit. So my prompt now reads, small child reading under a tree as a photo, make child various sexes and races in each photo. And you can see how better the images are on the right. So we got all sorts of different children being represented. This is probably more reflection of my community, what we see on campus, but we're still getting some underlying issues going on. Little boys in blue, the child who's the most obviously the girl in pink. So we're still getting some of that gender conforming going on. But another thing is, sorry, I tried to do this search in Adobe Firefly. And Adobe did not like this search. And this is going to kind of be like when you're working with databases or the library catalog, is the words really make a big difference if Adobe flags the word sexist. So I had to change, again, revise my search for Adobe Firefly and replace sexist with genders. So small child reading under a tree as a photo, make child various genders and races in each photo. And I think Adobe Firefly just did an amazing job with this set of photos. They look really good, but we're still getting a little bit of gender constraints going on here, but thankfully everyone is finally wearing blue. But if you notice, the children all appear to be able-bodied. There's still some lack of diversity that is happening. So I decided to try and play with some other keywords. And I asked Adobe Firefly to make the child various abilities, various disabilities, and it really didn't do a good job handling that. What I did is I eventually changed my prompt to say, make child disabled in each photo, which is kind of a really weird thing to actually type out, but it gave me these photos. 3 of my photos are children in wheelchairs, and I would say overwhelmingly with generative AI, if you bring up any sort of disability, it's going to be someone with something wrong with their legs, whether they're on crutches or a wheelchair. It almost always defaults to that. So we know that there's another underlying bias somewhere in generative AI data sets that is saying that disability equals wheelchair. But if you look, we got the pink and blue again, short hair, long hair, we're seeing some issues. But what is going on with the wheelchairs? Especially those bottom 2. The one in the corner, I think, looks more like a backpack with wheels. I'm not even sure what's going on. And this is because there's a hierarchy in the order of the prompts when you are working with generative AI. So the first thing that you put is generally what the software would consider the most important. So in this case, small child reading under a tree was the first part of my prompt. So Adobe said, okay, that's the most important thing. And my last part of my prompt was make child disabled in each photo. Because I listed that last, the software said, that's the least important thing. I don't have to worry that much about it. So again, we have to revise our prompt and thinking about our order. Really small tweak. That's all we did is change the order. A small child sitting in a wheelchair under a tree, reading a book as a photo. And you can see I got lots of different commands here. They're short, specific, detailed, but look at the difference in these two level of results. And then we could do other things. Here's the small child reading a Braille book, then non-binary child reading under a tree. So you could tell generative AI programs to be have diversity, but the thing is it's not the default. All of these programs have the ability to represent your communities, to be diverse. It is not the default. So you have to kind of mitigate this issue through prompting. And then we can do fun stuff because I like to do fun things. So here we go. Small child reading under a tree as a photo, movement, sci-fi. Again, you can see I'm being really short with each part of my prompt. And now we're getting the photos on the left, planets, domes, lens flare. We could thank Michael Bay for the lens flare, I believe. And then the photos on the right, small child reading a book under a tree as a photo, mood, spooky, color, dark, theme, Halloween. Again, it's a long prompt, but each part of my section is pretty concise and specific. And some interesting things happened with these two prompts. I ran them several times. For whatever reason, the spooky prompt gave me pretty diverse images. Lots of different races were representative. And I had a decent mixture of boys and girls, although there was a slight preference for girls. I would say about 60% of the children were girls in that photo. The sci-fi photos were overwhelmingly white boys. So I think there's something happening because as a genre, sci-fi really overlooks diverse voices, women, people of color, things like that. So if I was going to do something with sci-fi and I noticed I was getting these very similar images over and over again, I would probably have to revise my prompt and say, make the child various genders and races. So let's do some text-based. So we're going to move to ChatGPT. So we all know by now, especially after 3 days, about AI hallucinations. You cannot perfectly get away from that, but we're going to talk a little bit about how tweaking and revising can limit it. So I started off by asking ChatGPT to create a reading list of how librarians can use artificial intelligence to train students. And I said, certainly, here's a list. Gave me a list of 10. I only screenshot 5. And you can see they look pretty good. They're mostly books. I think there's an article or two in there. But I'm going to use my AI literacy and I'm going to double check and say, does these really exist? Not a single one of these. There's 10 books that it gave me and not a single one out of the 10 resources actually existed. And if I look around, I can see where it's pulling the information. It's mismatching it. So the first one has a web page with the title by a different author. No evidence that this author writes about AI. This one has a book with a title, different author, no evidence that these two authors write together. For the fourth resource, found an article with a modified title, but the author that is listed has been dead since 2016. So again, it's just making stuff up and mismatching. So can we revise our prompt to do a little bit better? So here's the tweak to the prompt. Create a list of the top 5 rated books on library instruction. And in this case, I asked for titles and authors only, just because I wanted the screenshot to fit on the screen. It looks pretty good. So these are 5 books. I have titles, authors. And again, I'm going to use my AI literacy and just double check on these. And in this case, 4 out of the 5 are real books by the people listed. The third one is actually an online class from a different person. It's not a book. So it did better, but again, it's not going to be perfect. Another way to tweak this prompt and revise it is I asked ChatGPT, create a list of the best-selling LGBTQ children's books. I said, sure, here you go. Gave me a list of 5 books with the authors. And in this case, every single book is there. We have probably all know about ChatGPT written cover letters, so I thought I'd cover this really quickly. And anyone who said any hiring, you have probably seen dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of AI written cover letters. So I did a quick search and I found a library director position at Adams State University. And I just asked ChatGPT to create a cover letter. I gave it no other information, create a cover letter. And this is what it gave me. And it looks pretty decent at first glance. I'm writing to express my interest with a proven track record of leadership, a passion for fostering inclusive, looks okay. But as you get down into the second paragraph, it says, I have led several key initiatives that have significantly enhanced library services. I have been instrumental in securing grants. I have spearheaded the implementation of a digital library platform. Those sound really good and things to brag about, but they're really generic. So in this case, a generic prompt gave us a generic result. So what is my track record? What program, what digital library platform, what were my initiatives? Doesn't say actually anything. So I started revising my prompt. So the first thing I did is I took the job description and I uploaded it into ChatGPT. The job description is freely available online. I wasn't too worried about privacy in that case. And it gave me a much better cover letter because it started pulling out key things from the job description. Still wasn't good enough. So what I decided to do was take my CV and I put it also into ChatGPT. My CV is freely available on my university's website. I'm not too worried about privacy. And honestly, ChatGPT has probably already scraped my CV into their data set. So in that case, I wasn't too worried. And it asked it, with these two new bits of information, write a new cover letter. And we could see how different the cover letter is. The second paragraph, I hold a Master of Library Science, a Master of Public Administration. It talks about my career, 2 decades, progressively taking on more responsibility. It talks about my current position. It talks about my interim administration positions. And then as it goes on, it starts talking about my experience rebranding, developing for credit instruction, names the class that I rebranded. Talks about accreditation and assessment work that I do. It shows my commitment to diversity by showing my leadership in the ALA Social Responsibilities Roundtable, the University Diversity Affirmative Action Committee. So it's matching the things that I actually really do, my experience that I really have, with points into the job description. Now back to Kristin to talk about some other stuff.
All right. Another way we can use AI is to enhance metadata. And these are just a few of the things we're going to briefly talk about: image tags, image description, Dublin Core records, MARC records, and classification numbers. First, image tags. Now, anyone who's had a collection of digital images and are needing to come up with tags and descriptions, it's a very time-taking process, and it can be a little tedious at times of trying to think of, what am I going to say? This is actually an image from one of our special collections. It's of a bicentennial celebration in DeSoto Landing, Arkansas. That's the Mississippi River behind it. I did 2 different prompts in ChatGPT. One is an expert cataloger for academic library, and one just create tags. And this is what it came up with in both cases. And for the non-academic, it came up with 20. The other, it came up with 16. But when you look at them, they all make sense. They all could be possibly used for what you're looking for. It gives you a good starting point. And then when you look at the overlap, most of them were found in both the academic prompt and the regular prompt. So for tags, it doesn't seem to really matter. Now for image description, this is a case where I just said, describe the following photo. I discovered that when I started saying academic library and academic cataloger, it started giving me shorter responses and a little bit more formal, which might be what you want. But in this case, it's doing a good job. Now, you look more deeply, it says the man who appears to be dressed in political patriotic attire. Well, we know he is because we know it's a bicentennial celebration. The description missed that there was a river behind it. So it's not perfect, but it's a good starting point that you could tweak it, but I wouldn't use it just the way it is. But it's a good starting point if you're having to generate. If you are having to generate a lot of images, though, descriptions, you're going to need a chat GPT or other chat bot that has a paid version, because otherwise when you're uploading images, you're going to go through your free credits very quickly with just 1 or 2 pictures. So what about Dublin Core records? In this case, you need to give it specific information of what to fill in. And so that's the prompt I used. And everything that I told it to fill, it filled correctly. But it also noticed that the image was a PNG. It noticed that the type was an image. I hadn't told it to say that. It did say language was English, and for photos you wouldn't do that. So you'd have to tweak the prompt to say, no, don't include that tag. But interesting enough on the description. Now it knows it's a bicentennial celebration. It knows where it is, but the description is he's a man decorated in red, white, and blue, likely a part of the bicentennial celebration at the Soda Landing. Well, we know he is because it's part of the collection. So the description's not perfect. It still would need tweaking, but it's a very good starting point for if you would need to start creating records. Once again, it's based on that uploaded image though, so you would be using up credits very quickly unless you had a paid version. Now, what about MARC records? MARC records is something that a lot of people are interested in, because if it would be just let ChatGPT or another AI do it, we could get through a big backlog. We're not at the point yet where we can just say, make a record on this book, maybe give it the ISBN or the publisher. It can go find it on Amazon or the publisher website and bring it back to us. We're not there yet. So you've got to give it more information. This is a very generic prompt. I just gave it the name of the children's book, which is about the flood of 1927 with John H. Johnson. And it correctly gave the title. It correctly gave a fragment of the title. And it correctly got the subject heading of John H. Johnson. And because I told it was a children's book, it correctly flagged it was juvenile literature. Everything else is a hallucination. Now, the classification number is the classification number for people living, biographies for people living in the United States, which is correct, but is it the most accurate? But everything else, it's assuming it's color illustrations because it's a children's book, and it's assuming it's a small book. It's actually 35 pages, so it got that pretty close, but this is majority hallucinations. So we're going to need to craft a prompt, and this is where you're having to do a very long prompt with very short statements and telling it exactly what you need. And so that's the prompt there. And the first glance, it's pretty good. I did not tell it about illustrations. It assumed because it was a children's book, it's going to have some color. It's actually all color illustrations. It still came up with a hallucination about the subject. Its subject headings are decent. It added the publisher as a 710 tag, which it didn't need to do. I told it had a second author, and it correctly put the author in the correct tag. Now, one thing about this, and it did come up with a subject heading in this case, but that's okay. We'll work on that later. But the thing about this book is the second author technically is the only author. Angela F. Courtney is the founder of the Friends group, and the Friends group has officially been listed as the author, but later on in the book, they say, oh, by the way, this is the author, but it's not an official location for RDA of where you're supposed to get the author. So we're going to have to add a tag. So in this case, we're going to have to tweak the prompt and tell it specifically and tell it exactly what you want to add. And it correctly added it. Now, we still need to change the subject of this because it's still giving us this hallucination of it's not about his struggle in life. It's about that he survived the 1927 flood. So in this case, this is a very long prompt. It's from the back cover. It's also available on the publisher website. You can copy and paste. Because summaries tend to be so long, I choose to do this as a separate prompt so it won't cause any confusion. Just let's replace the hallucination, and it successfully does it. Now, it's been given information that this book is about a flood, that it takes place in Arkansas City, Arkansas. However, you'll notice the subject headings still don't reflect that. And that's because ChatGPT assumes that they're correct because I haven't told it otherwise, nor have I told it to enhance anything. Now, I'm saying let's add more subject headings, specifically about floods, about Arkansas City, Arkansas. And this is what it came up with. It correctly put Arkansas City, Arkansas as a 651 tag, and it got the flood tag correct. However, it knows this is a book about Arkansas, and yet it still decided to put the flood as United States history. So it's a technically correct subject heading, but it could be more accurate. So this is a case where you're still going to have to look this over, not necessarily as much for hallucinations, but for accuracy. And is it giving you the level of accuracy that you want? So where do we go from here? Because this is a lot of work to create and tweak the perfect prompt to create an accurate MARC record. And I haven't even started working on the leader codes yet, which you could do with additional prompting. It's very time consuming to come up with the individual statements, but you would tell it to format it for OCLC connection. You'd copy the code as text into MARC edit, convert, and import into connection. Is it worth it? If you're already familiar with original cataloging, honestly, it's faster just to create the record from scratch. But what if you are in a library with you're short-staffed, maybe you don't have original catalogers, or they're learning how to do it? Right now, AI is still giving too many hallucinations and assumptions that I wouldn't trust the record without somebody looking it over, without somebody that had original cataloging experience. Now, some of the hallucinations, somebody could probably catch on, but a lot of MARC codes are letter codes or number codes that it's hallucinating on, and somebody might not realize that. The assumption about the flood, yes, technically it's United States history is correct, but it's more accurate to be Arkansas history. And someone just learning cataloging or without cataloging experience might not catch on to that. Now, if you had somebody who could do original cataloging, like April said, I can do it, but that's not part of my job duties. If somebody could do it and had time to look over, if you were in a crunch that you needed some original cataloging done, yes, you could have some non-cataloging staff work on creating records and then have these draft records for somebody with cataloging experience to edit, because it's faster to edit something than it is to create from scratch. It's still a very time-consuming process, and you still have to be very careful to catch all the assumptions and all of the hallucinations. So
there's
about
only
MARC.
there's only 7 minutes left.
Okay.
So okay.
All right, we're almost done. So what about classification numbers? This is a case where I asked ChatGPT to come up with a classification number. Now, it originally had come up with one just for biography. This time, it came up with a more specific, accurate one, specifically for African American biography. However, it missed a nuance. And the nuance is that technically for African Americans living in a particular location, which this book is about, you're technically supposed to classify it under the location. Now, all three of these are technically correct. Some are more accurate than others. It also depends on your library's catalog and how you choose to classify. So this would be a good starting point if you were stuck trying to find a classification number, especially if you weren't familiar with cataloging, but it still needs to be checked. And I guess that's one of the main messages that we have for all of this, is that AI is a great tool to help you, but use your AI literacy and double check everything.
And so we were almost under the wording. So thank you, everyone. And we'll take some questions. I did see the question about what's the difference between the theme and a movement. Movement tends to be art movements. I wanted to see if I can get some sci-fi art thrown in there. Theme tends to be more broader, like holiday themes, things like that. So any other questions? I know there's some.
You can add your questions to the question and answers also. I see April has been keeping track of the chats.
Someone asked, how would AI software tools make use of invisible disabilities? I've been pondering that myself. I'm not really for sure. And I'm not for sure it could do it in a way that's not offensive. I don't know on that one. And I know that's probably not the answer you were wanting. I see someone's asking for the links for the slide deck. We will share our link with the slide deck with the Gale people, and so they can hopefully send that out to everyone who's registered.
Oh, there's something in question and answer. If you work with the AI over a long time to train it to catalog, could it eventually work? Could we make a specialized GPT?
Honestly, I don't know. Maybe down the road, I don't think we're there yet.
You know, maybe if you had your own instance of ChatGPT or an AI tool, there are, you know, publishers that are working with creating their own tools. I know there's library vendors creating their own tools. So maybe eventually, but it would take a lot of training. And even then, you would never fully trust it.
And there's another question. How do we, or can we even handle how big tech large language models with will censor our results? Example, who won 2020 election? Copilot and Gemini will not answer. Google confirmed they won't allow. Oh my.
Yeah, I saw that. You know, you can sometimes trick AI, and I almost gave examples of tricking AI to answer questions it don't want to answer. But that's a really niche skill set. And I think that's going to come into part of, as library professionals, when we train people on AI literacy. And I think this is something that libraries are just constantly going to get asked questions on how to do AI and work with AI. Part of our training, even if it's just one-on-one helping someone, is don't trust it. It's not always, get your outside source, match it with an outside source. Whether people listen to us, unfortunately, probably not. Kristin, you have anything to add?
Nope, I think you covered it.
I think in chat, somebody pointed out that we should try the MARC 21 SLSP assistant here. I don't know if either of you are familiar with this, whether that Nicole Henning.
I am not familiar with that.
Yeah, well, you might want to copy it for us to look later or for you to look. I'm not a cataloger. Thank you. We have 3 minutes left. I want to thank you. This has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for this wonderful program you have developed. I'm sure you'll be able to add your slide deck and everything.
I hope so.
Yes.
We're always available via email too, if someone just wants to reach out directly.
Oh, absolutely. So did you have that on your starting slide? Maybe you'll want to transfer that to your starting slide.
I will put my email in the chat real quick.
Okay, that's a good idea. Thank you. Remember, these presenters are from Arkansas State University Library.
I'm adding mine as well.
I see one worried that we are promoting these resources throughout the will of big tech. Yeah, 1,000,000% agree.
Oh,
All right. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
thank you. And so I think we're going to close a minute early.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kristin and April. That was very interesting.
Thanks, Marcia.
Thanks, Marcia.
Okay.